You wake up disoriented in this place. It's a mall of some kind. It's familiar, but you can't recognize exactly what mall it is or where it's located. As you scan the hallways, you see no one else. You call out,
Hello?
but all you hear is your voice echo through the corridors.
Hello?
You begin to panic. Your heart rate picks up. You feel afraid. But why are you afraid? Things are well lit. There's no one around, and nothing ominous is here to harm you. For some reason, this realization makes things worse. You are terrified. But why are you so scared of nothing? That is the question we will answer today. What you just experienced is the horror within liminal spaces. I will give you two things that could be the reason why these are some of the most unsettling places within horror today. One will be more academic, the other more obscure. And in the end, I plan to tell you my own argument for why liminal spaces are the scariest setting in horror, and why they are my favorite. But first, we must understand a couple of things. Introduction to liminal spaces. First off, what are liminal spaces? Liminal spaces are defined as transitional areas or moments that exist between one defined state or another. They are often characterized by a sense of ambiguity, uncertainty, and a feeling of being in between. They often blur the lines of what was and what will be, creating a sense of disorientation or uncertainty. But if this is so scary, then why are liminal spaces just now becoming such a big thing in horror and thriller media? Well, you may be shocked to know that these sort of settings and places have been haunting us for a lot longer than you realize. Horror creators have become adept at taking a feeling of dread from all sorts of things, and then amplifying that sensation. From disturbing body horror and a fear of what happens when a piece of you is mutilated, or even transformed against your will, to slashers wrought with stalking killers that you can't escape, and my personal favorite, psychological horror, meant to focus in and disturb your mental, emotional, or psychological state. Liminal spaces are the perfect setting for any story meant to make you feel isolated, trapped, lonely, or filled with fear, and all without a shadowy room with the lights off. Now listen, I'm sure a lot of you watching this video have heard of a little series here on YouTube called The Backrooms, and I applaud Kane Pixels for his videos and storytelling, which on that note, congrats Kane for getting greenlit with A24. I'm super excited to see the big screen adaptation. But with that said, in regards to liminal spaces, although most people became familiar with the concept of liminal spaces through The Backrooms, I am here to say that liminal spaces have been around a long time, and not just in horror. Take a look at these classic on-screen examples of liminal spaces in media. The Twilight Zone used liminal concepts and spaces throughout the show's run, but especially in episodes like their very first one, Where Is Everybody?, where a man finds himself lost and alone in a world that looks like people disappeared right before he arrived. It's filled with empty streets and businesses that should be teeming with people, but they're not. A 2001 Space Odyssey used many scenes filled with impossible set design, meant to make you feel disoriented in space, taken away from the world in a sickly, futuristic, and modern, isolated way. The Shining has a plethora of liminal set designs. I chose this specific scene, as it has been said many times since the film's release, that this particular room where the interview takes place is a space which physically cannot exist. And it is also said that Kubrick was very intentional, and that left speculation to believe that this liminal space was created as a way to instill discomfort in the audience, subconsciously. Inception with its many scenes of world-bending dreamscapes, and most importantly Limbo, empty and devoid of human life, most of all, that the characters are isolated from their children for decades. Vivarium is set in a liminal landscape of identical homes that make up a maze-like suburb that traps the characters within it. And most recently, the show Severance utilized labyrinth-like corridors that are often disorienting as we follow characters around twist and turn after twist and turn, oftentimes at confusing speeds that make you feel like at any moment we will run into whatever awaits you around the next bend. Along with many more examples, but I think you get the point. Liminal spaces are not new. They have just become more refined with the passing of time, and given an actual title to accompany the feeling that they have always given us. Let's take a look at our first possibility of what truly makes us fear these places. Part 1. Liminal Nightmare Science. So what is the academic history of liminal spaces? And does it explain the fear that we feel from these otherworldly places? Let's start all the way back at the beginning. The word liminality was first coined in 1909 from French folklorist Arnold Guénep and stems from the Latin word limen, which means a threshold or a doorway. He first wrote about the concept in a book titled Rites of Passage, in which he discusses the many changes in status that people go through throughout their lives, such as childhood to adulthood or going from being single to being married. He refers here to the moments spent between these status changes as the liminal period. People are betwixt and between, no longer holding their previous status, but not yet incorporated into their new one. To explain this a little bit better, let's use the marriage example. We're all familiar with pre-wedding jitters, getting cold feet as we call it. This stems from looking back at your life. You know what has happened and the freedom that you had. You look forward to the future and the uncertainty of what it may hold. Are you making the right decision? The anxiety spent in those moments is a state of liminality. This idea was then expanded upon by anthropologist Victor Turner in 1967 when he published his book The Forest of Symbols, in which he included an essay titled Betwixt and Between, the Liminal Period in Rites of Passages. There, Turner wrote that liminality served not only to identify the importance of in-between periods, but also to understand the human reactions to liminal experiences, the way liminality shaped personality and the sudden foregrounding of agency, and the sometimes dramatic tying together of thought and experience. The attributes of liminality, or of people at the threshold, are necessarily ambiguous. One's sense of identity dissolves to some extent, bringing about disorientation, but also the possibility of new perspectives. But how does any of this apply to horror and how we view modern liminal spaces and the way they make us feel when viewing them? Liminal spaces are a setting representation of times we remember from history, oftentimes a remembrance of times we enjoyed. Some of the earliest shopping malls began in the 1950s. However, they saw their peak in American culture between the 1980s and the 1990s. Since then, with the boom of e-commerce, they have been on a downward spiral. Yes, they still exist, but they are on the way out. They are experiencing a transition, an in-between state, or a liminal state. When we view their existence now, we are remembering what was, a nostalgia. Seeing them vacant and devoid of human participation leaves us with this liminal sense of disorientation. People are supposed to be there, but they aren't, and we miss them, which leads us to why these settings are uncomfortable for us. Liminal spaces as we know them today are transitory places that act as go-betweens. However, you may have noticed that there are other places that give us a state of liminality in the internet age. Due to the COVID pandemic, we were able to see firsthand what it looked like to see places that were meant to house large groups of people be instead completely vacant. Stadiums, schools, movie theaters, conference halls, though not necessarily transitionary, they all symbolize a nostalgia of what we missed most during that time. A liminal sense of nostalgia for what was, and places that made us experience that loneliness spent away from society, time spent in isolation. It is part of the human condition to want to interact, to be around others, even if we hate being around people. It is comforting to know that other people are right around the corner. But what happens when they are not right around the corner, and you feel trapped within that isolation? That is the fear of liminal horror. To close out the academic section, the original root of liminal, being liminality, means that we get a heightened anxiety from being in a state of transition as we look back to the past and towards the uncertainty of the future. Part 2. A liminal logic theory. The uncanny valley is defined as the phenomenon whereby a computer-generated figure or humanoid robot bearing a near-identical resemblance to a human being arouses a sense of unease or revulsion in the person viewing it. However, we all know it as the feeling you get when you see something that is supposed to be human, but somehow we know it is not. Animatronics, aliens, demons, mimic entities, we all have an inherent human sixth sense. We know when something is off, even if we can't articulate the feeling or why. We are very good at identifying the minute idiosyncrasies of another human being. When we identify something as supposed to be human to our eyes, but instead we know it is not, we feel fear. In the same way, when we are within liminal spaces, we can use that same sixth sense to identify what should be, but is not. Places that should be populated with people, but no one is around, though well lit and not ominous on their own, can instill in you a feeling of isolation, loneliness, and a departure from the human condition. You may be thinking, Mr. Bagman, sir, that's not what is scary about liminal spaces. And depending on how you look at things, you may be right. There may or may not be a better reason for us to be afraid of liminal spaces, outside of what the researchers say. Let's indulge in some theory and explore the dark side of this rabbit hole. As we have already discussed, there is a discomfort generated from the one-to-one of liminal spaces to the uncanny valley. For this next portion, we are going to take that a step further. When you research the uncanny valley, you will inevitably read on about a theory that is spun off from the research done regarding why humans are revolted or disturbed by robotics trying too hard to look human. This expansion of the initial research is called the threat avoidance hypothesis. The threat avoidance hypothesis regarding the uncanny valley is the argument that there is more than just a discomfort that people get from seeing something that should be human, but isn't quite right. Some people believe that we don't just have a discomfort or a distrust of the uncanny creature before us. We fear the thing in front of us for a very good reason. This theory revolves around the idea that people have come up with an evolutionary sixth sense to determine what is human versus what is not, based on a threat that existed at one time in our history. Something that was dangerous and deadly. A predator. Something that seemed human, but was not. Liminal spaces are the setting equivalent to the uncanny valley. We know when we are somewhere we shouldn't be, somewhere that we are inherently unwelcome. We know when we are not alone. We know when someone is watching us, even when we can't see them. When you enter a hallway, a room, a road, with no one else around, you are easily spotted, easily hunted, because you are exposed. This sense of fragility and vulnerability makes your skin crawl. You can't see the threat, but you know that it is imminent. You are being hunted. You are prey. And your predator is unknown. Much like the fear of the dark, you fear the unknown more than the threat you can see. So there you stand, in the middle of a bright lit mall, afraid of what awaits you around every corner. This feeling is amplified by another improbable fear. What if around that corner, there is another empty hallway, and another corner, with another hallway, with more corners and more hallways to follow? A labyrinthian nightmare. What if you're trapped, alone with the unknown? But is it unknown? Part 3. Dreamscapes. Is there a tiebreaker between these possibilities? Possibly even a third explanation? Now I know I said there was only 2 possibilities, but this is my video, so we're going to go down that rabbit hole, because I wouldn't know how to shut up and stop exploring to make a short video to save my life, apparently. Indulge me here. I promise that it will be more interesting than the academics at the beginning. Anyways, here we go. Going deeper, I have one last possibility. What if liminal spaces simply remind us of a real place that exists, somewhere we have been before, or possibly repressed? Subconsciously, we are aware of them and the dangers they contain. If you search around online, you will find that there is a subreddit titled r/mallworld with 28,000 members. Within this subreddit, you will find something interesting. r/mallworld was created with the intention of discovering people who all share in similar dreams. Dreams of a massive mall with level after level of looping hallways, filled with giant movie theaters, food courts, mazes of escalators, stairways, elevators, and shops, though most of the shops are closed or unopened. But according to the accounts here, it's not just a mall. There are places within these vivid visions outside the mall, twisting massive empty roadways spanning off into infinity, libraries that span miles and reach up to the clouds, hotels, airports, amusement parks, casinos, schools, pools, and even kids' playrooms, all endless and all empty, for the most part. Because the contributors to r/mallworld do not necessarily believe that they are alone in their shared liminal dreamscapes. Actually, they report being visited by quite a few entities in their lucid limbo. Beyond just the occasional other sleepy visitors to Mallworld, some users report being blocked from entering certain areas by malicious entities or guards. Others say that their entities remained invisible, yet they made their presence known and even punished them for attempting to break certain rules within the mall world. Some claim that they seem to be there for a reason. They are filled with an intense sense of purpose. Still others claim that they have certain physical limitations in mall world, like not being able to move or speak properly, like sleep paralysis. Overall, the consensus that I have seen and read here is that there is some other force at work controlling this other dimension, and humans are either not supposed to be there at all, or certainly not supposed to be awake and lucid while there. This gives this theory a Matrix-esque feeling of hidden power that pulls the strings to a shared consciousness experiment, or of a simulation. The users on r/mallworld believe that this is a real place, that we tap into it in our dreams, though it may not always be a good place to find yourself. Conclusion. As far as my thoughts on what the root cause is of the fear found within liminal spaces, when I look at the possibilities that we have covered, there is the academic response. We have a nostalgia, a longing for what was, and a fear of what is to come. A theoretical belief that we have a sixth sense that makes us fear the vulnerability of being exposed and open to unknown threats. Or, liminal places are real, otherworldly places that we glimpse while we dream, places that shouldn't exist, and sometimes that dream can become a nightmare. But in the end, which one of these do I believe makes liminal spaces fill us with the terror that they do? I believe that liminal spaces terrify us for a little bit of all of these reasons. And that's not just a cop-out. Let me explain. When you look at a liminal space, it is a reminder of a longing for what was, stuck in nostalgia, living in isolation, and a fear of the unknown, trapped in a place we feel shouldn't exist with threats all around us, a dreamscape turned into a nightmare, and horror has found a way to tap into that underlying fear of the world that we live in every single day. We have always held an underlying fear of isolation and loneliness. However, this fear was brought to the forefront in 2020, which is why we also saw a surge of liminal horror preceding and following that time. Oftentimes, the most terrifying thing in life is a fear of something real. Isolation and loneliness was very real during that time, and it has opened our eyes to that terrifying reality. Now we all truly know what it is like to feel trapped and alone. Liminal spaces also represent loss, a grief we all share, a representation of a depression that we all share in the cultural zeitgeist. And for those that feel comfort when looking at these images, or maybe a relaxation, think about it like losing a loved one. You stare at their picture, remembering good times with them. You feel a completeness and a contentment. However, when you inevitably realize that they are still gone, it leaves you devastated yet again. With liminal spaces, we feel that longing for what was, a time that the places and images call back. We feel contentment, until we remember that was then. This is now. And we are uncertain of what is to come, uneasy, disturbed in that discomfort. I think that liminal spaces are some of my favorite places to enjoy because as a kid growing up in the 90s, we were the last pre-internet generation. Like many, I grew up frequenting malls, movie theaters, playgrounds, community pools, and many of the spaces encapsulated within liminal spaces. I daydream of the food court with friends after high school, friends I haven't heard from in years, time spent waiting in line outside the mall's GameStop at midnight, or even just getting dropped off to waste time and walk around with friends before a movie. I miss those times. And it appears that I am not alone in my longing for that childhood spent as a latchkey kid, free of turmoil from the world around me. As a society in 2025, our lives have never been more in flux. It doesn't matter what political party you're part of, or what country you're from, what your hobbies are, or anything about you. As a whole, the generation today deals with more transitory uncertainty every day. We never know what will be, and we long for what was. Blockbuster, malls, video games, and toy rooms. Simpler, happier times. But sadly, we live in a liminal world every single day. We are betwixt and between. It's scary out there. Stay safe. Good night.